Is software engineering disappearing? Are no-code site builders and SaaS builders going to be the future of web? Is the software engineering position going to disappear off the face of the earth? My name is Mario Peshev, and I'm going to tell you my story over the past 25 years building software applications. I've been running a software development agency that's generated 8 figures in revenue over the past 14 years. And I'm also using some of these site builders and app builders such as Software and Bubble and Frontly, and also some of the other site builders such as Webflow or Wix or Squarespace, even though my agency is specializing in exclusively scaling WordPress solutions. Now, why is that and what's the future of software development? First and foremost, we need to segment and differentiate the different types of software applications and the different types of businesses. Let's start with a software development business or a SaaS solution that's starting from zero. So we have a zero MRR or ARR, so monthly recurring revenue or annual recurring revenue as the foundation of a business. Whatever that business and that application is built on, it doesn't really matter because it's essentially generating no revenue whatsoever. So it's essentially meaningless so far up until it starts making some money. Then we are growing to 1K MRR, 5K, 10K. So we are already in the 6-figure range, making over $100,000 a year in revenue. Then we have 100,000 to a million to 5 million, 10 million, 50, 100, 250, half a billion, and so forth. So this is kind of how it's accelerating and how it's progressing. That's essentially valid for pretty much everything else that we're doing, regardless of whether it's a to-do app or any sort of project management system. It really doesn't make a ton of difference for a small app. So what I'm going to say here first is both solutions are going to be equally valid and viable. And in fact, no-code solutions are going to be more important and more significant in the early stages of application. So when we are thinking about that scaling stage of a business, moving from zero to millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, we are considering different considerations that we're going to discuss here in this video. So a business is roughly speaking in 2 general stages of life. Stage number 1 is product market fit, trying to figure out whether that product is sustainable, whether there's demand for the business for that specific product. Are there enough customers for it? Is the total addressable market going to be sustainable enough and large enough to accommodate for that product? Is the pricing accurate? And so forth. So in essence, is there any need for your product whatsoever? This is usually something that you identify while reaching the 7 figures. So zero to a few $100,000 a year to $1 million, sometimes slightly higher than that, is the product market fit stage. Why? Because products that have actual real product market fit are products that can scale to the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, or even scaling to a unicorn status. Because there's so much demand, the market is so strong, there's so much alignment between the feature set and the benefits and everything else, and what the customers need, that it only makes sense that this is going to be a product that's going to exist in the future and it's going to work. Even if you don't have product market fit, it's essentially fairly easy through the brute force method to get a few customers paying you a few thousand a year and essentially scaling up to $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 a year, which may sound pretty interesting. However, you also have to account for the cost that this revenue is not your net income. It's very important to understand that. You're going to deal with some development cost, even if it's a no-code solution, hosting, licensing, API keys, potentially some payroll, any other operating exchanges, licenses for other software as a service solutions that you're using, accounting, legal, taxes. So it's not going to make such a huge difference if you're making $100,000 a year with a solution that doesn't have product market fit. In fact, if a new product arrives on the market that actually has product market fit, they may outcompete you because they work better user experience, better pricing, better integrations, and so on and so on. So this is why we are delineating pre-product market fit solutions and solutions after product market fit is already there. Now, what's the difference between these solutions? Once you reach that threshold of, let's say, $1 million a year, this is going to be a breakdown of a certain number of ongoing customers using your application. And you may reach that threshold, or the no-code solution may actually prohibit you and kind of limit you from reaching that threshold. So that's very important to understand. If you have UX quirks, if you have lack of integrations, lack of all sorts of other activities that you need to account for to be a really great, seamless, UX-friendly solution, a performant one or scalable one, and so on, then you want to make sure that your application is something that scales. However, again, the catch-22 here lies in the fact that you don't want to spend $100,000 or more in building a bespoke solution or using a software development framework or WordPress, which is actually really great for SaaS applications in most cases. So it doesn't make sense throwing all of that in something that's not really proven and it's not really validated. So the other thing that we also need to understand when we're working out the pros versus cons era in software engineering is about 48% of the US GMV is generated by small and medium businesses. So we have a very small number of large corporations. We are talking sub 10% of all companies in the world are large corporations. If you go higher up the really multinational large corporations, it's about 1%. If you take a look at S&P 500, it's essentially 500 companies in the S&P 500. So it's a very tiny little percentage of massive, humongous companies that, of course, it makes sense that they're building bespoke software. However, SMBs account for the smaller subset, and there is this large gap between really a starting 5-person team and a corporation that has over 1 million employees, such as Amazon, for instance. So what are the differentiating factors, or what's the reason to avoid using a no-code builder? Well, once again, using no-code tools such as Bubble and software and so forth are great during the product market fit because there are a lot of iterations going on to achieve what you're after. So there's a lot of experimentation going on. You need more agility. You need things to happen fast. You need to be able to add quick fixes here and there really quickly, regardless of scalability. But once you have a mature product, if you've reached that phase, it gets dramatically more complicated to turn simple and generic features into something that's bespoke, really powerful, and really meaningful, really significant for a large business. So what are the 10 major considerations and the 10 reasons why software engineering is never going to disappear off the face of the earth, and no-code builders will always have to be sunset and replaced and upgraded by something more powerful? Number one is limited customization. No-code solutions and no-code builders have one very distinct advantage, that you can build stuff in no time by drag and drop components and other activities that don't involve development. However, as you're scaling your product over time, you're going to face a lot of business requirements and customer asks and everything else happening due to the fact that there needs to be some modification and some customization. For example, you may have a prompt that's already pre-designed or an input box or a drop-down, but some of your customers may have other compliance requirements, such as this needs to be a different component type, or it needs to use a predefined, pre-populated set of data using some nomenclature, which is for accounting or legal or hospital software and stuff. So you may lack both integrations and the inability to actually design that in the right possible way. If you have charts and dashboards, it's pretty common because you may have some bar charts and pie charts and just graphs, but there are lots of customization that you're going to find in professional software such as Tableau or Looker Studio that have tons and tons of different features, letting you extrapolate data and display it in so many different ways and color code it and so on. So no-code builders, they have the basic set of requirements and features, but it's in no way extensive. And the more you start scaling up, the more limitations you're going to face. And for certain customers, even one of these missing features or integrations may be the turning point to not opting for your product or to move to a different software solution altogether. Number two is scalability issues. Once again, as you're growing your software solution to a massive application generating tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, you're going to deal with thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of customers at the same time. Using a no-code solution is going to pose one of the two challenges. Number one, it's not going to scale as well because, simply it's not designed to scale as much because everyone in the enterprise is using bespoke software, and these no-code solutions are not really used to scaling that much. Or number two, it's going to pose other limitations such as cost to let you scale, which is going to be prohibitive. So both of these are kind of equally possible. And more importantly, when you think about software engineering, when you have to optimize something for scalability, you oftentimes have to go outside of the general best practices. If we take database engineering as an example here, you have to go from the proper form of normalization of a database, meaning following the best practices of building relational database tables, to denormalizing a table purely from scalability and performance issues. there are tons and tons and tons of case studies showcasing how companies such as Instagram or Snapchat or Oracle are taking unorthodox approaches to develop something, such as inventing their own image formats or stripping down standard components off of metadata to cut down some gaps, or moving from TCP to UDP, which is less safe in losing packages, just to be faster and faster. So growing applications are following different approaches to grow, and your traditional no-code solution is not going to support that and letting you scale well enough. Number 3 is integration challenges. Now, the fact is that most no-code solutions support bridge plugins and solutions such as Zapier or Make, letting you integrate third-party solutions. However, this doesn't support everything. And in most cases, you also have to sign up for another software as a service solution, and you have to account for their API limitations and so on. So the moment you need to integrate something, there's probably an integration existing or an SDK or a library or so for existing programming languages and frameworks and even solutions or site builders such as WordPress, but there's no necessarily great connection and kind of a supported framework initiative for your no-code solution. So keep that in mind, because again, every proprietary platform can only develop so many integrations. And the more you start scaling up, the more you're going to face implementation and integration needs that are not going to be supported because there's not enough demand for that. Number 4 is vendor lock-in. Now, as someone who's running a WordPress agency, I know for a fact that we have lots of customers coming our way due to different challenges with a previously hosted enterprise CMS or web content management system, or even solutions such as BigCommerce or Shopify that have banned them due to some incompliance issues or too high of a return rate or something else that's happening and it's actually ruining the business. We worked with an e-commerce store that generated about $1 million the year before, and they found an influencer marketing channel that enabled them to start generating nearly $1 million a month on Shopify. However, Shopify saw that as a fraud because it was unusual based on the volume and amount of data that they were processing, and they did shut down their store. Now, there may be different reasons for that. It may be false alarm, it may be pretty much everything, but relying on a third-party solution always has the risk that you do not own your data. You may not be able to export your data. You may be down for reasons outside of your control, which is why, of course, running on your own architecture makes so much more sense. Number 5 is less control over data and security. The more you start growing up, the more interesting you're going to become for the IRS or competitors or auditors and lots of other people aiming to charge you something, or customers who are unhappy or have higher requirements and want you to comply with GDPR or CCPA or any of the other requirements out there. The more you climb up the ladder, you have to deal with accessibility issues and other regulations and compliance frameworks, depending on what sort of industry you're working with. So the challenge here is that most of these solutions are not compliant and ready to go by default, working and managing all sorts of data. Even if they are, you may have custom requirements to remove all sorts of user data, or you may have to go to two-factor authentication by default, and you don't want to use SMS, for example, you want to use Authenticator or something else. Or you may have specific needs to encrypt your data and host it externally to AWS RDS because compliance is better. So lots of these challenges may come up at the point where you already have monthly recurring revenue and you're unable to export all of this data or provide all of the security and data protection and privacy controls. Number 6, higher long-term costs. This one is very important. First, one of the reasons why you use one of these no-code builders is they're really easy to start with. You don't have to have coding experience. Essentially, it's drag and drop. So it's more or less a matter of your time or someone that you hire to keep managing that. You can easily make changes, even though they're not necessarily compliant and following the best app development practices or scalability requirements, but it's really easy to start, really easy to get something up and running, and fairly cost-effective to pay, let's say, $30, $50, $100 a month and run an application that's, again, actually up and running and may start to serve some clients. So it's very tempting to do that. However, it's also very common to do the very same thing in the software engineering industry with hosting. So lots of companies start developing on top of AWS or Google Cloud or some of these cloud hosting solutions, because it's very cheap to start. You may be paying a few cents a month at first while you don't have users, and then you can keep scaling and scaling and scaling, and it's really easy and it's frictionless and so forth. Same goes for hosting and offloading assets to S3 and so on. Like lots of different examples I can give in here. However, the more you start scaling, the more expensive it actually becomes to keep being hosted on one of these organizations. So we see some of the enterprise companies or social networks reaching hundreds of millions of dollars of bills to a third-party cloud provider, and then, of course, deciding to bring it in-house, spending 12 to 18 months moving all of that in-house, and essentially cutting the costs down by 60, 70, even 80% by moving it in-house. So this variance is very important. Of course, you may hit it at a very late phase, but even early on, there's this segmentation and gap between you're paying something, you're happy, and then a sudden policy change kicks in, or you need an extra feature that suddenly moves you into the enterprise layer, and your application becomes unsustainable out of nowhere. Number 7 is performance limitations. I already provided some tips and some ideas for charts or graphs or some of these lacking the types of features, or some of the common best practices such as moving to denormalized SQL databases, or maybe moving to a NoSQL database for some reasons. Every software solution and architectural paradigm or framework or library or database has pros and cons, and professional developers can advise you and kind of recommend and pick the right solution for your matter. However, with a no-code solution, they are limited to a certain set of programming languages, database layer, REST APIs, and everything else as part of the software infrastructure. One example is some of these no-code solutions, they only work with Google Sheets or maybe Supabase, and many of them do not support the proper RDBMS solutions such as MySQL, or Postgres, or Oracle, or MS SQL, or anything that's no SQL such as MongoDB or CloudDB or Cassandra, or some of the other popular high-scale solutions that are running behind the largest possible enterprise solutions on the planet. So you're working with an okay stack coming up to a certain number of entries that you can manage, but that's not necessarily something that you're going to deal with long enough and something that's going to be supported long enough. One example that we faced with one of these apps is we were dealing with Excel items and Google Sheets. We ended up reaching a limit of 500,000 rows in the same sheet, because this is what we were using for some order tracking. And we were unable to accommodate more data due to limitations of Google Sheets at that time. It was ridiculous, and it was something that happened during Black Friday sale. So, of course, it was more or less unexpected. It was 6 times higher than what we usually handle and the number of orders that we normally manage. But we hit a limitation of a product that's not designed and meant to be used as a database. So we really had to suck it up and kind of wait a few hours for that limit to reset and move to a new sheet. And then we had to backfill and backtrack orders between payment gateways, which was ridiculous, and once again is not something that would ever happen in a custom software build. Number 8 is limited access to underlying code. I know no-code solutions are designed so that you don't have to tinker with code. But guess what? You use a Mac or a Windows PC, and in both cases, you're dealing with some edge cases. Maybe your laptop is not hibernating properly, or maybe you're opening up an app and it's crashing for some reason, or maybe it's freezing when you open Zoom. There are some of these edge cases that you, as someone who doesn't have access to the code base, cannot debug. And even if you're not a professional software developer, which is expected, then you still cannot hire a professional software development firm to manage these issues and help this out for you. The CrowdStrike bug that brought down half the internet, airports and hospitals and ticketing systems and banks and so on, it was a software patch coming from a third party installed on Microsoft Windows machines. So even if you have someone in-house, they cannot dive deeper in and dig into these issues, revert to a previous version, or limit something so that people can essentially use their software at the time after an automated update. So that's a very clear reason and a very simple one to understand that in some cases, especially as your app is starting to scale and grow, you have to have access to the underlying code base to be able to employ a team to solve a very complex issue instead of waiting sometimes for years for the core developers to get to that issue and fix it, especially if it's limited to you and it's not a common problem that everyone else is facing. Number 9 is feature bloat. And I can tell you for a fact that we face that in a WordPress environment in my agency as well. When we land a website by an enterprise working with a bloated multi-purpose premium theme or a premium slider that's so heavy that the website takes seconds to load. Now, certain features or certain platforms are not inherently bad. The problem is that some of these solutions that are supposed to cater to everyone deal with tons of lines of code, hundreds of thousands, millions of lines of code designed to fit every single solution. And in many cases, you're only using 2%, 3%, 5%, 10% of that feature set, and you end up with another 90% of checks and verifications and controls and asks and whatnot, expecting you to use a software solution in a way that you're not expecting to use it yourself. So you end up suffering the consequences of another 90% of the code base that's not serving you well. So that's something that's also happening with no-code solutions because they are designed to serve everyone and they provide you with a list of components and a list of elements and integrations and whatnot. And these things are loading behind the scenes or are kind of running in the core code base regardless of whether you use them or not. Of course, there are some optimizations here and there so that not everything is loading all at the same time on every page and screen load, but nevertheless, your database is designed this way, your underlying layers are designed this way, your API infrastructure is designed your way, your security, and every other single layer is expecting that all of these components should be working and playing well together, and there are some compromises on this. With a bespoke solution or even built on top of a framework, or another lightweight core solution, it's a lot easier to avoid this or remove these or just drop them, rebuild them, fork them, do whatever it is to trim down and strip away all these annoying features that are bogging the website down or potentially causing security issues. Number 10 is learning curve. Now, what I found out is that many of these no-code solutions are designed to be so easy to start, but not necessarily so easy when you have to deal with a very specific issue or just tinkering down and fine-tuning something that's supposed to be so easy. One common example is things like sliders that seem so great, and you can probably import a demo and end up with a solution that looks incredible up until the moment you have to update it yourself. You have to change the photos. Well, suddenly it doesn't look that great when your photos isn't the same size or the same ratio, so it doesn't really play so well. Or you work with a font that's not supported in a different language, so it looks really horrible. Or there's an animation or transition or something else that you cannot mimic. Or when you swap two sections or two apps together, it's looking really differently, it's broken, you have to design it and cause transitions and gradients and so on. So it looks really great and 90% of the work is done in no time, but then the other 10% of the work may not take 90% of the time. They may actually take 900% of the time because some of these are not supported and cannot be done, and you cannot even hack them away with CSS or something else that you would do with a production app. So it's very, very, very important to understand that there are lots of different limitations. And as we're wrapping up this list, again, there's definitely room for these no-code SaaS builders and app builders and mobile web app builders, right? You can probably get 60 to 70% of all cases covered and sorted with them. Heck, maybe you can even get 80% of them solved. But when it comes to scaling and growing a proper application, a proper tool, a solution that you're about to sell and serve clients and charge them and have an agreement with them and have a privacy policy and all of that, you better be 100% sure that you can comply and you can protect their data and you're secure and you're not going to end up with a PR campaign or expensive paid ads running through a solution that you're serving that's not able to withhold or sustain all of that traffic coming your way. So keep in mind all these limitations. My summary over here is software engineering is definitely not dead. It's just moving slightly upwards for applications that are actually making some money, at least 6 figures in revenue, in some cases 7 figures, but there's a lot of risk underlying below. And if you're building something that you want to turn into an actual business, you better be prepared to be working with a software development firm after a few months of getting your product market fit ready.